The Hebrew word for learning is lilmod, as some of you may know, but it's also the same word as the word for teaching. Lilmod and lilamed is the same word, because you can't really learn if you don't teach, and you can't really teach if you don't learn. And that's why I'm going to remind everyone what Amy said at the very last second of a little introduction, and that is that if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or even just blurt them out. That's fine. This should be much more of a discussion than a quote-unquote lecture. Speaking of lectures, I was reminded on the way here of the story about this man who was speeding at 3 o'clock in the morning. 3 o'clock in the morning he was speeding, and a police officer stops him. He says, "Excuse me, if I may ask you, you were just speeding, but where were you speeding to at 3 o'clock in the morning?" The man says, "I was speeding to a lecture." He says, "At 3 o'clock in the morning, you're speeding to a lecture? For some reason, I don't believe you." And the man says, "I promise you, follow me, come home with me. As soon as I as soon as I open the door, you'll see the lecture we'll get." But that's not the type of lecture I'd like this to be, and therefore really, please, ask questions. Let's delve into the text, into the study together. We are here to lilmod and lilamed. So speaking of the holidays, and really how to make not just the best of the holiday, but the best of our rebirth. Because on Rosh HaShana, as our texts teach us, we are reborn. Why do they say that? That's simply because Rosh HaShana is celebrated as Rosh HaShana. Why? Because that's the day when Adam and Eve were created. The world was created on the 25th of Elul. 6 days later, on the 1st of Tishrei, which is the first of this Hebrew month, Tishrei, God created Adam and Eve. To go back to that very root of creation, each and every year, we celebrate Rosh HaShana. That's what Rosh HaShana is about. And I believe that this is the first of the 3 points I'd like to present to you today that really speaks or gives us the key of how to open ourselves, how to be reborn, or how to be a new you or a better you, as the title here suggests. But let's first look at the actual sources, and then we can discuss them and delve into them in a deeper way. Who wants to read the first source? Babylonian Talmud Tractate, Sanhedrin 37a. Anyone? Anyone? Please, go ahead, and you'll read the second source. Go ahead.
Babylonian Talmud Tractate, Sanhedrin 37a. All creatures were created in multiples, with one exception, the human being. Man was created alone. When Adam was created, there was no other human being present in the entire planet.
Right, if you think about it, it's amazing, because when God created all the plants, for example, He created all of them together. When He created the animals, all of them together. When He created the stars, all of them together. When He created the human being, He created him alone. Adam was created alone, and then Eve was created alone. Why that difference between the human beings and the rest of the universe? The answer, I think, is brilliant by Rabbi Schneerson of blessed memory, who tells us what a human being is supposed to stand for, and therefore he was created alone. Let's read the next reference.
Why did Adam have to be lonely for a while till God formed his better half? The answer is simple but profound. God wanted to teach us a lesson. Human identity does not exist in relation to others. I'm not a response to you. My value is never dependent on your validation or approval. My existence is never conditional on your acceptance of it. Myself has absolute inherent value. My I has infinite dignity and is perfect the way it is. God loves each of us unconditionally, unequivocally, not because of anything we do or won't do, don't you, but because our very I.
Right, and this is why Adam and Eve were created alone, because we are unique. You know, I've said this often, but I personally, and please feel free to disagree with me, I don't like the word unity. I'd much rather communities be called not communities, that imply unity, of course, but I'd much rather be called harmonies. Why? Because unity comes from the word uni, which means you have to fit into this melting pot. You almost have to lose yourself in order to unify with the other. Well, harmony really means that I am I, and you are you, and we'll harmonize together. Like instruments in a symphony, like colors of a rainbow. You use your parable. But that's the way God wanted us to be created, wanted us to function. We are each unique. We each have our own personalities. We each have our own skills, our own talents. The reason I am here is because I have something to bring to the world that no one else can bring. The same Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Schneerson, says that birth, this is a beautiful quote, birth is God's way of saying that you matter. Birth is God's way of saying that you matter. Why? Because if you didn't matter, He wouldn't have created you. If there's someone just like you, why the need for you? And therefore God created us individually to say that there is uniqueness in you. And until we don't embrace that uniqueness, we can't really be reborn. And in a way, that's what we do during the high holidays. We don't face outwards as all other holidays. Think about this. All other holidays force the Jew to face outwards. Hanukkah, we face towards our history. Tu B'Shvat, we face towards the world, the plantation in the world. You name the festival, and I'll show you how we are facing outward. Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur are only the high holidays, are the only holidays in which we are told to face inward. That's why in Rosh Hashanah we are told to listen to the shofar. The shofar is reminiscent of this inner voice, the voice that cries to us from time to time that we silence and we say, no, let's be like everyone else. I think Woody Allen is the one that said, I'm not sure it was Woody, maybe another comedian in Hollywood. Woody Allen doesn't interest me these days especially, but I think he or someone else said that it's interesting because when I was growing up, I wanted to be somebody. And then when I grew up, I realized I had to be a little more specific about that somebody. Because that somebody is maybe an image of someone that's not you. Woody Allen did say that it's interesting how people work hard all their lives to become famous, and then they wear sunglasses so that no one can recognize them. Now why? I think that's simply because they became that which they are not. They became someone else. They didn't live according to their own destiny, their own personality, their own uniqueness. And therefore they become embarrassed and they wear sunglasses. And I think that's why we have a Rosh Hashanah, so that every year we can somehow realign ourselves with our deeper self, become in tune with that soul, with that uniqueness. And that is what the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah speaks about, and so many others. I just want to read here the Baal Shem Tov quote, which speaks again of this calling of Rosh Hashanah. On each Rosh Hashanah, does anyone want to read? Please. Please, Nicole, go for it. Okay, good. So we are reborn. Why are we reborn? Because on each Rosh Hashanah, God gives us the strength to face ourselves again, to face our deeper self. And when He gives us that strength, then it's up to us really to embrace it and carry that calling into the year. Now, what stops us? What stops us from becoming our unique self? Of course, social pressure. My dear Rabbi often says that the difference between a 20-year-old, a 40-year-old, and a 60-year-old, and I've said this before, is very simple. The 20-year-old's big question of life is how can I fit in, right? Let me dress like everyone else. Let me speak like, let me sing like everyone. I want to fit in. So how can I fit in? A 40-year-old's big question is, I don't care about how I can fit in. I'm just going to be myself. A 60-year-old realizes that no one was looking at him in the first place. But we on Rosh Hashanah are asked to reach that maturity level of a 60-year-old. Even if we're 15, even if we're 30, it doesn't matter how old we are, but then we should already say to ourselves, doesn't matter. No one is looking at us anyway, and the only person who is looking at us is our Creator. And our Creator wants us to be the way He created us to be. Now, how can we find that being, that uniqueness? And I've spoken in the past about the pop theory, which I want to mention very briefly here. But the pop theory, I think, is a good indicator, is a good GPS of how we ought to be unique. Pop theory is called the pop theory because it stands for personality, opportunity, people, places. The personality that we have, that we each have, is different. God gave us that personality for a reason. Now, I'm not just talking about skills and talents. I'm also talking about moods. I might have a more passionate personality than others. Others might be more calm. But we have to listen to our deeper self and say, well, what's the mood that I have? What's the skill that I have? What's the gift that was given by God? If you're an athlete and you become a chef, then maybe you could be a very good chef, but you don't live your true self. So you have to ask yourself really, and maybe even compile a list of what is it that you are based on that based on that personality. The number two is the opportunities. God gives us opportunities each and every day. And that's also a part of our talent, of our purpose, of exercising who we are supposed to be. Sometimes these opportunities might be very small, like the opportunity to smile at someone. Someone put a sad person in front of us, and all we need to do is smile. Or sometimes the opportunity is really to take upon ourselves a new job that just came to us on our table, or a new relationship that just was introduced to us. Whatever it may be. But we have to be able to listen to those opportunities of life. The number three is people. I think the people that we meet in life are there for a purpose. And God placed them there for us to exercise our uniqueness and somehow connect to them in our own unique way, or them connecting to us in their own unique way. Some people come and go. Some people stay for life. And it depends really on everyone's relationship. But they are there again for us to learn from them to learn from us. They are there for a reason. And the number four is the places. The places we go to, I think, are there also. God leads us to those places for a purpose. You think you might have gone to a vacation in the Bahamas? Well, it's not just because you went on vacation to the Bahamas that you were sent there. You went there, sent there sometimes maybe to do some wonder there, to meet someone that you would have never met otherwise. Who knows? But every place we go to, even the local supermarket, is there for a reason. We have to be able to become in tune with that purpose that lies for us there. That's how we can best become in tune really with ourselves. I think besides social pressure, the greatest obstacle that stands in front of us is really a one-word obstacle. You know what I'm talking about? Ourselves. Okay, me, that's a good one. What? Ego. Pretty good. Yes, I would agree with all of these being obstacles. But maybe the biggest of all, it's actually a two-letter word. Two-letter word. What? No. Oh, no is a good one. I would say it's the word if. If has become, and I don't know, I'm in tune with this a little bit, but when I hear conversations of people, it's become like one of the most used words. Besides, who said ego? Besides I and myself, and people love to talk about themselves. But besides that, if. People say, well, if I win the lottery, then I'll give a lot of money to tzedakah. If I had hair on my head, then I would be able to go out and forge relationships. If this, if that. Don't worry about the ifs of life. Turn them into whens, or turn them into possibilities. Becoming an active participant of life instead of a passive spectator, you may call. That's right. You remind me of the story of the Lubavitcher Rabbi, Rabbi Schneerson, who was visited by the chief rabbi of Israel in 1974, about a year after the Yom Kippur War, where the state of Israel, the state of the people in Israel was filled with fear. You know, Yom Kippur War wasn't a war that we celebrated. It was a war that costed 3,000 people were killed, and it caught us by surprise, and many other reasons of why it filled Israel with fear. And in 1974, the chief rabbi of Israel went to see this great rabbi, and the great rabbi asked him, so what's the mood in the streets of Israel? And the chief rabbi of Israel, Rabbi Allouche, said, the mood can be summarized in the question that people are asking, and that's the question of ma ihyeh. What will be? Ma ihyeh. And Rabbi Schneerson immediately corrected him and said, Jews don't ask ma ihyeh, what will be. Jews ask ma naaseh, what will we do? We can't just be, passive spectators of life. We got to take action. Manaseh. So that's number one. There's a great scientific experiment. I don't know, I mean, not great, I should say, a cruel scientific experiment that was performed on caterpillars, on processionary caterpillars, that portray this point quite well. Who wants to read it? Yes, Diana, please.
The processionary caterpillar is so named because what makes this little furry insect unique is its instinct to follow the caterpillar in front of it in a procession. Processions consist of 300 caterpillars or more, often fooling predators into thinking caterpillar processions are snakes. It is a fascinating and charming sight to behold as they move along nose to tail and in a likeness of a miniature train with their eyes half closed, searching for food. Jean Pomre Fabre, is that right, placed an abundance of the caterpillar's favorite food, juicy green leaves, at its center. And then he enticed the lead caterpillar to start circling around the circumference of the flower pot's rim. The other caterpillars followed suit in a tight single-file process. Fabre then succeeded in getting the lead caterpillar to connect up with the last one, creating a complete circle which moved around the pot in a never-ending procession. The head of one caterpillar touching the rear end of the caterpillar in front of it. Very visual. It followed the one ahead, thinking that it was in search of food.
And they continued on and on and on like that until they died. So now this was an experiment on processionary caterpillars, but it might remind you of some human beings that follow each other's leads again and again, around and around, but they don't take their own personal action. They don't follow their own personal being. And I want to tell you the story I read just this past week. It's a story that was amazing to me, but it reminds me of this point. There was a story that happened in 1995. A man by the name of Mr. Onions in Great Britain. Ernst Onions was his full name, and he was a very bizarre person who collected paintings. He loved art, and he collected a lot of different types of paintings, and he would keep them in his basement, and his children thought he was weird. Eventually, this person died, and his children said, what are we going to do with all these paintings? Maybe we'll just give them up to an auction, and they'll auction it for us, and we'll keep the profits. They gave him up to an auction. One of these paintings was a tiny little painting that was put on auction, and it's an amazing story. And this painting, the auctioneer thought that it came from the 17th century by this almost unknown artist, and all he could maybe ask for it is 15,000 pounds. So he set a date for the auction. At the auction, there was a very famous art collector by the name of Dennis Mahon, Sir Dennis Mahon. I don't know if you're into art, but he was there, and he said, no, this piece is worth so much more. Why? Because it has a candelabra, it has a menorah in the background, and it's reminiscent of a different artist. And I know that there were two such pieces of art drawn. One is in the Museum of Vienna, and I guess this is the second one, because they say that the second one disappeared. It must come from, it probably comes from another artist, also from the 17th century, by the name of the French artist by the name of Nicolas Poussin, and Poussin, I think, or Poussin, right? Poussin? Yeah, and if it does come from him, then it's worth so much more. So he bid on this piece of art 100,000 pounds. Someone said, what? Sir Mahon is betting, is offering 100,000 pounds. He's a maven. I'm going to up this auction. And they went up to all the way to 155,000 pounds. Eventually, Sir Mahon won the auction. And then he did his research, and he found out that it was from Nicolas Poussin, and that this piece of art was really worth so much more. Eventually, Lord Rothschild bought this piece of art for how much? For 4.5 million pounds. 4.5 million pounds. Now, the original owners had sold it to this auction for 15,000 pounds. but it was really worth 4.5 million pounds. Why am I thinking of that story? Because in here we have a piece of art that's worth millions and millions of pounds. Actually, it's priceless. But very often we compromise ourselves and we say, you know what, we'll just be like everyone else. Yes, we have great aspirations, but life makes them too impossible. And instead of truly owning the person that we are and being the person that God wants us to be, we fall into this passivity. And here Rosh HaShana comes and truly reminds us, you were born alone. Birth is God's way of saying that you matter. And you matter because you have millions and millions and millions of dollars of worth in you, much more than that. So act upon it, be that person, be that individual, and then you can harmonize with others and not necessarily unite, as we said at the beginning. That's number one. The number two theme of the high holidays, which also speaks of how we can become those better yous, those new yous, as we said, is hope within tears. It's interesting, I mean, it's not such an un-Jewish thing to do, but Rosh Hashanah, if you follow the prayers and the Torah readings, it's all about crying. It's all about crying. We read about mothers crying on Rosh Hashanah. Altogether, about 3 mothers crying. And if that's not enough, we add the shofar, who many commentaries remind us that it's the sound of a baby crying because it's your inner baby crying. So we cry all the time. Now I know Jews love to cry. And it's like those 3 mothers who were sitting on a bench in Central Park, and one says, oi, the other one says, oi, the third one says, oi, and then finally one of them says, okay, enough speaking about our children, let's move on. But we love saying, oi, and we love kvetching, as they say, and so on. But still, why, I mean, on such a joyous day, on a day in which we are reborn, why read about mothers crying? Why is that the main theme? And I believe that there's yet another message that can truly help us become better yous, or better us, on Rosh Hashanah. Let's read about these 3 mothers, and then I want to focus on one big idea. Does anyone want to read?
On Rosh Hashanah, we read of 3 other mothers weeping. In the reading of the second day, Hagar, the maidservant of Abraham, mother of Ishmael, weeps as her child and her are stranded in the desert without water. She does want to see her child, I guess she doesn't want to see her child die, so she goes off sitting somewhere far away from her child, and she weeps.
Right. It's just a grueling scene. She's sitting, her child is dying, Ishmael is dying, so she puts him on one corner and she doesn't want to see him, and she just sits in another corner and waits for him to die. Go ahead.
Next day, we read how a Jewish woman, Hannah, wept for her children.
Right.
On the second day in the Haftarah, we read how Rachel weeps for her children. Here are the words of the verse in Jeremiah, chapter 31. A voice is heard on high, lamentation, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children, for they are not. So says the Lord, refrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for there is reward for your work, says the Lord, and they shall come back from the land of the enemy. And there is hope for your future, says God, and the children shall return to their own border.
Right. Okay, so these are the 3 mothers crying. But if we pay carefully to the verses, to the stories themselves, we'll see that there's a great difference between Hagar, the maidservant of Abraham, crying, and Rachel and Hannah crying. Hannah, by the way, was crying because she wanted a child. Eventually, God gave her a child, and she promised also at the time she was crying that if she was going to be given a child, she would dedicate him to the temple, which she eventually did. But there's a great difference between Hannah and Rachel crying on the one hand, and Hagar crying on the other hand. What is this great difference? Let's continue to read, if you don't mind, Anne, just this last paragraph here.
But there is a striking difference between the tears of Hagar and the tears of Hannah and Rachel. Hagar weeps with utter passivity. Her son is dying from thirst. Instead of turning over the world to try and save him, she goes to a corner weeping in resignation. Hannah and Rachel also cry, but they act on their tears. Right after her crying, Hannah makes a commitment on behalf of her future child. She promises God that if he will grant her a child, he will light up the world. Rachel, too, tradition tells us, chose to be buried in Bethlehem on the road leaving Jerusalem, not in Hebron, so that when her children would be exiled from Jerusalem, she could be there for them, and storm the heavens in tears. Indeed, her tears are so effective that God pleads with her to stop sobbing.
Right. So there's 2 types of crying. The Hagar way of crying is crying, which means giving up. My child is dying. I'm going to the other corner. I'm just going to cry because I know that he's dying and there's nothing I can do about it. You've raised your hand, and that's the cry of giving up. The other type of crying, which is Rachel's crying and Hannah's crying, is that I'm going to cry until a difference is made. I'm going to persist, be as resilient as could be, so that change comes about. It's a whole different type of crying. But that's the Jewish way of crying. Yes, we cry, but we cry until our cry reverberates and creates ripples of change in the world. That's how we cry. That's the model of Hannah. That's the model of Rachel. You know, it's interesting because the word for crying in Hebrew, there's words for tears, but the word for crying in Hebrew, the Hebrew language, by the way, is really just a beautiful language because so many of the words have multiple meanings. So many. The classic example I use all the time, it's my favorite example, and that is the word for face in Hebrew, as some of you may know, is panim, right? Why is it panim? Panim means faces. There is no word for one face in Hebrew. That's because the Hebrew language knows that no one has one face. The face I have with my colleagues is not the same face I have with my spouse. The face I have with my spouse is not the same face I have with my children, and so on and so forth. But the word for crying in Hebrew is what? Does anyone know? Bechi, or bechia, right? Now, it's interesting, but bechi also comes from another Hebrew word. Does anyone speak Hebrew here fluently? Bechi comes from the word, yes, be. What's chi or ki? Right. So bechi, if you split the two syllables from one another, you have be and chi, which means in because. In because. The Zohar explains something beautiful, that's the Jewish cry. A Jewish cry wants to know the because, wants to know the reason, wants to know the reason why this happens, why they are crying, and once they connect to the reason, then they can facilitate change. That's the beauty of the Jewish cry. And I think in a way that we read about this on Rosh HaShana because God tells us, look, life is not smooth sailing. I don't know of anyone who's had a serene life 365 days a year. Maybe you do. Do you? I don't know. I don't know of anyone like that. But God says that to us very clearly. Life that's smooth sailing is maybe an utopia. It doesn't exist. You're going to be crying. But when you cry throughout the year, I want you to cry Jewishly. I want you to cry like Rachel and like Hannah. Dig and dig and dig until you find hope in despair, until you see that light in the darkness. That's the Jewish way of crying. I'll never forget the story of the Fogel family. You may remember this. March 11, 2011. It was a Friday night. The Fogel family was sitting in their home in Israel, peacefully having Shabbat dinner. And you may remember these horrific, evil terrorists came in and butchered the family. Parents stabbed to death. 3 of their children were also stabbed to death. And there were 3 survivors. The older sister, Tamar, and her 2 younger brothers who hid in the room. The older sister wasn't there. She was by a friend when this terrible tragedy happened. The year later, in 2012, on Rosh HaShana, Tamar Fogel wrote an article in Yediot Achronot, which is maybe the biggest newspaper in Israel. And then she wrote about where she derives strength from. It's the most, you can Google it, it's really one of the most moving articles you'll ever read. But she tells the story of how a few months before this terrible attack, this evil attack, she was babysitting. And unfortunately, as a babysitter, she had fallen asleep on the couch. And when the parents came home, they saw the babysitter sleeping on the couch. So they felt bad. They didn't want to wake her up. So what did they do? They were friends with Tamar's parents. So they texted Tamar's father saying, should we wake her up? We don't mind her sleeping here the night. That's fine. We don't want to wake her up. And we don't want to embarrass her also. You know, because after all, she should be up. She's a babysitter. And and Tamar's father responded to those people saying, don't worry. She's strong. She'll be okay if you wake her up. She's strong, she'll be okay. Now, that happened to be the last text that she had received indirectly from her father. Don't worry, she's strong. She'll be okay. And she wrote in that article just before Rosh HaShana, that's where I derive my strength from. Because I know that within my tears, there is my father's voice saying, don't worry, she's strong. She'll be okay. That's the Jewish way of crying. Now, her tragedy is unfathomable. I don't know if anyone can imagine such a tragedy. But within our personal tragedies, with our personal challenges and difficulties in life, we ought also to hear a voice saying, don't worry, you're strong. You'll be okay. And we cannot give up until we hear that voice that propels us to action. That's what this cry really is all about. I'll say this, that another Hebrew word, or a favorite of mine, is the word for crisis. The word for crisis in Hebrew is mashber. Mashber in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, also refers to the bed on which a pregnant woman would give birth. Why? Because in every crisis, there's an opportunity waiting to be born. Now, if you give up on it, if you're like Hagar saying, you know what, this is a crisis, it's too difficult for me, I'm going to run away, then you'll miss the opportunity. But if you're able to persist and find that opportunity, then you'll also realize that there's a great blessing there. So that's number two. Now, I just want to, again, we concluded the previous idea with the scientific experiment. Here's another scientific phenomenon that I'd like to read about the oyster. Does anyone want to read this? Yes, please, Randy, go for it.
As an oyster grows in size, its shell must also grow. Sometimes a foreign substance, like a grain of sand, slips into the oyster inside the shell, which irritates the oyster. It's kind of like the oyster getting a splinter. What does the oyster do? It responds to a grain of sand intruding into its closed ecosystem by secreting a solution which covers the irritant and eventually grows into a pearl.
All right, how long?
How long does it take from the initial provocation to the finished product? 5 years for a pearl of average size, and as many as 10 years for a big one. Think about it. It is the irritation that causes the oyster to produce a pearl.
Isn't that amazing? And that's why, if you can help me, there's many things I'd like to change in the English language. One day maybe I'll write a book about expressions that shouldn't exist. But there's many of those. But you know that in biblical Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, there's a word for this now. But in biblical Hebrew, there's no word for stress. There's no word for stress. Why? Everyone I know wants to have a stress-free life. But biblical Hebrew comes and tells you, well, maybe stress is good. Who says stress is bad? Stress produces pearls, even in oysters. So if you're able to persist, again, cry Jewishly, and be as determined as Hannah and Rachel were, then you too will find a pearl through that stress. There's nothing wrong with stress. Right? I mean, of course, yeah, you can get backache pains and who knows what. But if you deal with stress and channel it in the right way, then that I don't think will happen. So during the stress, one may not be, because we're so stressed and because we focus on the stress, then we may not be aware of the great blessing around the stress. But there's a pearl being produced at the same time. And sometimes what we have to do is not just to persist, but also to open up our eyes to that great blessing. You know, it's like the professor who once asked his classroom students, he drew a dot. Let me use your pen for a second. I'll do the same thing here. 2 dots. And he asked his students, what do you see? What do you see? 2 dots, right?
A colon.
Well, he responded, there's so much white. All you can see is 2 dots. So much whiteness. And it's true in life. Sometimes there's so much whiteness. Even in the stress, there's pearls being created. All we can focus is on 2 dots. So if we can take that stress in a good way, remember, there's no word for stress in the Hebrew language, in the biblical Hebrew language. I'm of the opinion, by the way, that if there's no word for it, it's usually a bad idea. So, for example, there's no word for teenager. But that's because we don't believe in teen years. You got to own it up. That's it. There's no word for retirement. Because Retirement is not where you retire and you say, you know, I'm quitting life. You can metamorphosis into a different type of living, but you still have to be as active, as contributing to society as ever before. There's no word for retirement. And there's many other words that don't exist in Hebrew that do exist in English, but one of them, again, is stress. Because we don't really believe in stress in a negative way. We believe in the Jewish way of crying, and that even in the cry, there's a voice telling us, be strong. I know you're strong, it'd be okay. In biblical Hebrew, there's no word for fun. In biblical Hebrew, there's kef, but in biblical Hebrew, there's no word for fun. And so it is in Spanish, you say, right? Interesting. There's a lot of modern Hebrew words for kef also for fun, but not in biblical Hebrew. In biblical Hebrew, I mean, the word that maybe is closest to fun is joy, simcha or osher. And by the way, just I know I'm deviating here, there's two words for joy in Hebrew. There's osher and there's simcha. Maybe it's the difference between joy and happiness in English. I'm not sure. But the difference, as the Talmud explains, between the two is osher is not the type of happiness we strive for. Simcha is the type of happiness we strive for. What's the difference between the two? Osher is happiness that you feel. So you won the lottery, you feel happy. Or someone gave you good news, you have osher. Simcha is happiness that you do. What that means is that you made someone happy, that's simcha. And that's the happiness we strive for. Again, that's a happiness that's active. It doesn't depend on you being this passive recipient of society, quite the opposite. You're the active participant, and that's what we strive for. That's why it says so many times that Ivdot Hashem b'simcha, one has to worship God with happiness. We have to live life with happiness, with that simcha, with the deed of happiness, not with the feeling of happiness. All right, so that's point number 2. Point number 3 takes us to one of the great stories of Yom Kippur, the story of Jonah, the bizarre story of Jonah being swallowed by a big fish. By the way, I know that in illustrations is, usually it's people think that he was swallowed by what? What type of fish? Whale. Well, do you know that biologically it's impossible? Because whales have very narrow throats. They can't swallow human beings. So it can't be a whale. It doesn't say a whale in the text. But just wanted to break that myth. But they are. Now Jonah experiences a storm. There are 3 different storms mentioned in the Bible. And they each share a common denominator. Who wants to read about the 3 storms? Or maybe we'll have 3 volunteers reading 3 different storms. Joyce, please.
There were 3 major storms in the history of humanity, threatening to destroy the entire world. One happened in the times of Jonah, as it is said, Jonah 1:4-5. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm rose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship.
Right. Okay, that's the first storm. And then eventually Jonah was swallowed by a fish, and then he repents. We know the story. The second storm is the storm of Elijah. Does anyone want to read? Please. Right. That's a beautiful image, by the way. Elijah, in this scenario, is running away from the Jewish people. He's sick and tired of leading them. They don't listen to him. They're worshiping idols. He escapes, and then God appears to him in a storm. And by the way, that's one of the reasons we believe that Elijah comes to each and every circumcision. Because after this little storm, God speaks to Elijah. And then Elijah starts speaking badly about the Jewish people. He says to God, they have forsaken you so much that they don't even circumcise their children anymore. God said, that's how you are speaking about my children? I'm going to send you to every circumcision from now to eternity so that you'll realize that you are wrong. That's why we believe that he comes to every circumcision. So be careful what you say. Just be careful what you say to God as you speak to him during the high holidays. But that's the second storm. The third storm. Anyone? Right, Job, who really had the most difficult life in the Bible and maybe in history, but he also experiences this type of storm. And by the way, this verse of the Lord gave and the Lord has taken away is a verse that we recite at funerals, representing the person that has left, but it was really a gift from God, and now God came to take his gift back. But the common denominator between these three storms, if you think about this, is fascinating. And that is that all three of these characters, Jonah, Elijah, and Job, were people who experienced storms. Why? Because they were escaping their purpose. They were escaping the purpose. Jonah was told to go and save Nineveh, speak to the people of the city of Nineveh, and try and make them repent. And he was escaping that purpose. Elijah, again, was escaping his role as the leader of the Jewish people, going to the mountains and trying to disappear. Again, then a storm comes. And Job also disappears or falls into depression. He doesn't want to live anymore. And then a storm comes to him. These are three great characters. All three were very great characters. But they did not heed the call of their own purpose. And then a storm comes about. What does this mean? That not only are we each given a unique I, a unique personality, right? A unique pop, like we said before, but we are each given a purpose. And in life, each and every day we must own this purpose. We must do everything that we can, even if it's difficult. You know, Scott Peck, in his great book, The Road Less Traveled, the first line, what's the first line? Life is difficult. Life is difficult. But even if life is difficult, we don't realize this. The Lubavitcher Rabbi, Rosh HaShana, once told a great rabbi, you know, God doesn't make a contract with us that life will be easy. Life is difficult. But even in the difficulties of life, we have to have that purpose. We have to be driven by it. And we have to heed the call, even if it goes against our comfort zone. You know, I'll never forget the story. Again, another story, and I apologize all these stories, but the story that my own rabbi told me, and by the way, I once asked my rabbi, speaking of my rabbi, Dinch I think is a person who's really put his ego aside completely and has dedicated himself to the Jewish people like very few have. I once asked him, what do you do? Why do you do what you do? And he answered very simply, because no one else does it. So I have to step up to the plate and do it. And so it's not because he feels like he wants to do it, like he has an ego. You know, he's purpose-driven. And that's really the model. But I'll never forget the story he told me that when he told me something that changed my life, really changed my life. It's just a few words. But if you think about this, he said to me, just like Joseph, you once sold. Joseph was sold as a slave. Don't see yourself as sold. See yourself as sent. You were sent. In every moment of life, you were sent there by God. Then he told me the great story of you know, why, I've shared this before, why the Breslev Hasidim, you know, the different type of Hasidic groups in Israel, and some are identifiable because of the way they dress or the way they grow their payas, right? There's two side locks. Some wear white socks, and they put their pants in the white socks. You've seen them? Yes? Okay. Some don't wear white socks, but they still put their pants in the socks. Some are different types. Some wear shtreimel, some wear just hats. Anyhow, the breasts of Hasidim wear, they grow the long payas, long side locks. Why do they do that? And that's because their great rabbi, Rabbi Nachman of Breslev, who lived some 200 years ago, told them that if you grow those payas, and then you end up in hell after 120, I'll come and visit you, and I'll pull you through your payas out of hell into heaven. That's why. Now, now my rabbi once told me, look, if you end up in hell, I'm not going to come and pull you. Not because you don't have payas, but I'm not going to pull you. Why? I'm going to come and visit you. And I'm going to tell you I'm not pulling you out, but instead I'm going to tell you your task now is to turn hell into heaven. You are sent. You aren't sold. And really, if we were to look at life like that, life would be so much more meaningful, so much more purposeful, so much more profound. And that's the type of life that God is telling us to live through this hint of the storm that Jonah experienced that we read about on Yom Kippur, to live really a purpose-driven life. Now, this connects to an argument in the Talmud. It's an interesting argument, but let's read about it nonetheless. About this expression, Bnei Maron, that, you know, all of mankind during the high holidays, both on Rosh HaShana and Yom Kippur, are passed or are led before God as Bnei Maron. What does it mean, Bnei Maron? And Talmud speaks about this. Let's read this interesting argument at the bottom of the 3rd page here. Does anyone want to read? Please, Amy, go for it.
Here, what is the meaning of the phrase B'nai Maron?
Right.
Here in Babylonia, they interpreted it to mean like a flock of sheep. In Jewish law, when we type our sheep, we pass the sheep through a narrow door or only one at a time. Each 10th sheep is typed and dedicated to a holy cause. Just as we take account of each sheep individually, so does God take account of each of us individually. Reish Lakish said, B'nai Maron refers to people walking on the slopes on mountain roads. On top of it, there is a very narrow path, and from both sides are precipices. Thus, only one person can pass on the path at a time. For if one more person joins him, they may fall off the cliff.
Finally.
Finally, Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, like the soldiers of the house of King David, when David's soldiers would go out to war, they would march in a single file, so each could be counted and recognized as an individual. So too on Rosh HaShana, we march before God and the soldiers of the house of David. Again, each of us is a
Right. Now, I have to ask you. I mean, I know Jews love to argue, but we have to argue about what Bnei Maron is. Just say that they walk in a single file like you do at the airport when the dog has to sniff you, right? Single file. Just say that. Do you have to argue what that single file really represents? Is it like the sheep? Is it like the people walking on that mountain, on Mount Hermon, which is the tallest mountain of Israel? It's not that tall, but it's still the tallest mountain of Israel. Or is it like soldiers in the army of King David? What does it matter? And the answer is brilliant. And that's because there are 3 types of people. You know, they say there's a great expression that says there are 3 types of people. Those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those who come too late and say, what just happened? There's 3 types of people. But in a way, those are the 3 types of people that this Talmudic argument is really referring to. Let's read the interpretation here, and I want to conclude with this big idea. Anyone? These 3 opinions. Please, Nicole, go ahead, yeah. Right. 3 ways of living life. You can live a life as a sheep. Just you let life go by. We'll see wherever it takes me. But there's no meaning in that type of life. I don't believe there's true happiness in that type of life. There's a great Hasidic Jew that I had the great privilege of meeting. He was in Siberia, in the Gulag for 20 years. And he went through a lot. But he once took his students in Israel to a narrow stream. And then he asked them, do you know which fish here are alive and which fish are dead? And they said, no, we don't know. He said, I also don't know. But what I can promise you is that the fish swimming against the stream are the fish that are alive. And he says, I want you to be like those fish. Don't be like sheep. Don't be like sheep, just floating through life. That's not the way to live life. You have a purpose. Number two, there are people that, yes, might be a little more driven, but unfortunately they're overcome with fear. Just like those people climbing the mountains and then they don't know if they can fall or not fall, like the description here of the Talmud. But then there's the third way of living, and I think that's the Jewish way of living. I'm a soldier in the army of King David. What does it mean? I'm here on a mission. A soldier doesn't have ego. A soldier is not here for himself. A soldier is here to fulfill the orders of his commander, of that commander. That's why I'm here. God has a calling for me each and every day. He made me wake up this morning because He needs me to do something today. Not something for me necessarily, but something for the world. And there's yet another expression, I touched upon it on Rosh HaShana a little bit, but there's another expression in the English language I'd like you to help me change. And I want you to tell your children, I know we tell our children, please be the best in the world. Whatever you do, you have to be the best in the world at it. Can you help me change that expression a little bit? Instead of telling your children, be the best in the world, please tell them, be the best for the world. Not in the world. The best for the world. You have a purpose. Right now, you just met someone, be the best for that someone. Right now, you just went to a place, be the best for that place. That's how we ought to look at life. We are soldiers in the army of David. There's a great, another great line that was delivered by Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi of 300 years ago, who once told his disciple, don't think what you need, but think what you are needed for. It's not what I need. Life is not about what I need. It's what I'm needed for. It's that purpose. And when you live that purpose, you create change. And not only do you create change, you create, by the way, for yourself also a legacy. That purpose is eternal. Why? Because it's divine. So it will reverberate in history again and again and again. I want to conclude with the story that I did research on Snopes.com to make sure it was true. You know, Snopes.com, you can, if you hear a story that's a little fishy, go to Snopes.com, they'll tell you exactly what part of it is true, what part of it is false, or if it's completely false or completely true. But there's a story about speech. You can see it on YouTube, a speech that was given by, a high school graduate who was the representative of his class. And in the middle of the speech, he turns to someone and he says, I'm here today thanks to you. What's the story behind that? I'm here today thanks to you. The story is that this person giving the speech, when he was in 8th grade, his parents had to move him to this new school. He began 8th grade there, which is a tough age to begin a new school. And he was very depressed, and he was suffering from all sorts of issues. And one day he said to himself, I'm done. I'm going to kill myself. And he packed all of his books from his locker, carried them, started carrying them to his bag, and then someone came and pushed him. He wasn't like the boy that was liked in school. Pushed him. He said, that for sure now it confirmed why I have to put an end to this. And he was lying down there with all of his books everywhere, a little bruised. And then someone else came to him and said, can I help you? Let me help you pack these books. I know you have noticed you've gone through some tough times here. I'll take you under my wings. He took him under his wings. He gave him life again. He gave him a purpose again. Eventually now, in 12th grade, he's giving the speech and he says, I'm here because of you. And then he broke the story to the world. And he said, in 8th grade, I wanted to commit suicide. I was on my way to doing so. But because someone cared for me and helped me pack my books and gave me life again, gave me joy again, I'm here speaking to you today. Why did that happen? Because there was someone, an 8th grader, who knew that he was living a purpose-driven life. That he might have rushed that day back to the carpool and say, I have my after-school activity to get to. But he said, no, there's someone in pain lying with his books on the floor. I'm going to help him. I'm here to be the best for the world, not the best in the world. I'm here to ask what I'm needed for, not what I need. And he assumed that role and changed the person's life for eternity. And I think every day, my friends, we live in a broken world. Every day we have these opportunities. And in order to truly actualize our best self, it's not enough to know who we are. It's not enough to look for hope within despair and cry the Jewish way. But we also must transform our lives into purpose-driven lives. And to say, what can I do right now, at this moment, in order to make this world a better place? I wasn't sold, I was sent. I'm not just the best in the world, I'm the best for the world. Shana Tova, and I thank you so much.